What's up, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here, and I want to talk to you about a graphic novel that I got for Christmas and I read a few days ago. This is Masks, an 8-issue miniseries from Dynamite Comics that is written by Chris Robertson with art by Alex Ross and Dennis Calero. Now, Alex Ross only did the interior art on the first issue, and then the rest of the series was by Dennis Calero, but Alex Ross continued to do the covers for the entire series. So, if you're out there and maybe you see this as a trade paperback, or maybe you saw like all 8 issues bundled together in your comic book store, and you're like, oh, cool, it's Alex Ross. No, Alex Ross just did the first issue, and that's a little misleading. Personally, I really like Alex Ross. I don't think his art here is as strong as it was in Kingdom Come, which is still my favorite Alex Ross project. But I don't think that the book here, what he's doing here, is as good as what he was doing in Kingdom Come. But I really love anything that he ever does as covers. I think he works better doing covers than he does doing interior art. But if you like Alex Ross quite a bit, and you see this and you're thinking this is an Alex Ross book, not so much. He only did the first issue and the covers here. And that's really the first thing I wanted to talk about. But also, this is basically just a sort of a Justice League for pulp heroes of the 1930s. You got a lot of really well-known characters who were created. Some of them were created back in like the 1930s, and then some of them were created much later. But like then you got other characters who are not really native to this time period, but are kind of being worked into this book anyway. And in premise, I really like the idea of let's take all these characters who normally do not work together and let's put them into a team-up story. I really like that idea. And a lot of these characters, I like the idea of seeing them team up and work together. The problem that I have with this book, it reminds me a lot of around the year 2008, DC Comics did this thing called the New Wave, where they were basically trying to do a separate universe kind of for these pulp characters like the Avenger or Doc Savage or the Spirit, and then they had an alternate version of Batman. They had all these sort of pulpy characters in their own little separate universe away from the main DC universe. And I reviewed that book a couple years ago, and my big problem with Masks is the same problem that I had with that DC New Wave miniseries, in that this has so many characters and is trying to shove way too many characters into the story, and as a result, none of these characters really get any moments to shine. There's all too many characters all trying to vie for screen time, and so none of them really get a chance to do anything special or important. I think that this book would have been served very well if they had taken almost half of these characters out of this book. And you may be saying, well, there's only like 5 of them on the cover. That's not a big deal, right? If it was just these 5, that would be fine. But there's actually 9 characters teaming up here, if I haven't forgotten any. You've got the Green Hornet and Kato, and I'm counting them as 2 separate characters because Kato is a masked hero who fights people in this book. And then you've got the Shadow, you've got the Spider, you've got the Terror, you've got the Green Llama, you've got Miss Fury, you've got the origin of a brand new Zorro. Normally Zorro is a Spanish character who fights crime in like the 1800s, but this is like one of his descendants in the 1930s. And then you've got the origin of the Black Bat. And both of these characters are not brand new characters, but this is a brand new Zorro, and this is basically retelling the origin of the Black Bat, who's been around since the 30s, I think. And he's kind of a combination between Harvey Dent from Batman and Daredevil. He's a lawyer, something happens where he's blinded, and then he starts fighting crime as the Black Bat, and as long as the lights are off, he can see what he's doing, kind of like a bat. 9 characters, guys, in the span of 8 issues, and well over halfway into this book, all of these characters still have not teamed up with each other. They still haven't all met each other over halfway into the book. Even in the final pages of the book, I don't think all of these characters have even spoken to each other at this point. There's different groups of characters, like the Shadow and the Spider and the Green Hornet and Kato. They're all working together pretty early on. But then you've got characters like the new Zorro and the Black Bat. They're kind of off on their own doing things. And then you've got the Green Llama and Miss Fury. They're off separately doing their own things. And they all kind of converge at the end of the story, but this book is selling itself as a team-up of all of these characters, but they don't all get to team up with each other in this book. And like I said, I think this would have worked a lot better if you had taken out about half of these characters. You've already got the Green Llama and Terror being featured in Project Superpowers by Dynamite Comics, and that was several years before this miniseries came out, but I don't think that you have to use those 2 characters in this team-up story, since you've already got them in another universe where they're being featured amongst amongst many other costume characters who are in the public domain. Get those characters out of here. Miss Fury, she's basically here as the token woman. She doesn't get to do anything in this story. She's just here. She gets captured with the Green Llama, and then she punches some dudes, just like all these other guys. Get her out of here. She doesn't do anything to help this story. Basically, if this could have just been 4 or 5 guys all teaming up with each other, I think that the story would have been a lot better. In a way, it really needed to be more like this story, the Shadow, Green Hornet, Dark Knights miniseries. I feel like if it had just narrowed its focus down to 4 or 5 characters and make it be an 8 or 9 issue miniseries so you can really explore all of these characters teaming up, I think it would have worked a lot better. Having said that, that is my huge problem with this book. Once you get past that, if you don't mind having an overabundance of characters who all can't do anything because there's so many characters in this book, once you get past that, the story here is alright. It's about, spoilers here, this former vigilante who calls himself the Clock. I don't know why he called himself the Clock, but apparently he was a real vigilante who, not a real life vigilante, but he was a character from the 30s, and then he is reworked into being a villain for this story. Basically, he was a district attorney who realized that the system was broken, and he could present hard evidence that this guy is guilty, but then he would get to walk because he had a lot of money, and he would pay the right people, and then he could get away with doing whatever he did. So then he became a vigilante, and then he goes out there and works outside the system thinking that that will work, and then that ends up not working for him either. So he says, okay, I can't work within the system and I can't work outside of the system. So he basically blackmails a whole bunch of people, and he basically buys all of these political candidates so that no matter what happens, he will have somebody as, I guess, the governor of New York or the senator from New York, one of the other, and then basically he owns New York City. And then he is able to create this army of stormtroopers. They call themselves, it's like the Black Army or something like that. They dress like stormtroopers, basically. Not stormtroopers from Star Wars, but like jackbooted thugs, if you will. Sort of Nazis, but they've got like black masks that kind of look like the Green Hornet's mask, but black. And basically, they go around and it's like, oh, okay, you don't have a job and you're walking on the sidewalk, so we're going to arrest you. And that's how this new Zorro gets thrown into the story. He's walking the streets, going to a job interview, and he gets arrested. And then it's like, hey, you, give us some money right now. And they steal a lot of money from citizens who are just out walking around. And this Clock guy, basically his motivation is, I have to create order. He believes that if he can just take over the city and eventually take over the state and then eventually still take over the entire country, he can just basically have a fascist state where he's in charge, and then the system doesn't have to work because he will be in charge and there won't be any more crime. It will more or less be a utopia with him leading the country. And that's an interesting idea. It's really interesting that you have this guy who wanted to save the world, but he realized that everything that he tried just wasn't working, and so he had to become a bad guy to do it. And then he kind of went over the edge doing that. That's a really neat idea. I'm sure there's people out there, like all 2 of them, who are a fan of the Clock, and they're probably not too happy with him being reworked into a supervillain, but I really like that as an idea. Unfortunately, this book doesn't really get to do very much with it because it's so cluttered with all these characters who are overcrowding each other and not giving each other enough room to be in the story. I think this story would have been a lot better if it could have just been 4 or 5 of these really well-known characters. Maybe the Green Hornet, Kato, the Shadow, maybe the Spider. I would personally get rid of this new Zorro kid because I think Zorro always works better if he's in the 1800s. Don't bring him too far into the future. Of course, this is the 1930s, so it's not the future, but don't bring him up into like urban, modern life. Don't do that. I didn't think that worked very well. Definitely don't do a new origin for a character like the Black Bat. Get rid of a lot of these characters who aren't really doing anything and make this more of the first adventure of this team. And then they eventually did do a sequel to this miniseries, not written by Roberson. I don't know how to pronounce that guy's name. Not written by him. It was written by Cullen Bunn, I believe. So if you want to bring some of these other characters in, like the Terror and the Green Llama and Miss Fury, you can do that later on in a sequel, but don't try to just shove every pulp character you can think of into this story right off the bat. You need to take about half of them out and let this story breathe a little bit. So ultimately, do I recommend Masks by Dynamite Comics? No, unfortunately I don't. This story had a lot of potential, but it did not live up to it, unfortunately. So no, I would not recommend this miniseries. But there are other pulp hero, two-fisted stories from Dynamite. They are really putting a lot of these kinds of stories out there. The Shadow has his own series. Flash Gordon, I think, has his own series. There's a lot of these pulp heroes from that era who are doing stuff
in Dynamite right now. So if you're into that sort of thing and you're thinking, well, that's a shame that Masks wasn't any good, there's still a lot of other stories out there that you can check out. So that's all I have to say on this book. I hope that you guys liked this video. If you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will be back later in the week with some other videos. So I will see you guys then. Have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.